I realize that you're not recommending everyone take the strictest approach, but for people that want to be optimal, you are saying that in the morning, Brian and Anna Marie, you're saying have a green juice with mostly sprout juice with 2 shots of wheatgrass. Do it again at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And for lunch and dinner, you're saying have a big salad that has green vegetables and sprouts. And when we talk about sprouts, just to clarify, are you saying A, take the same whole grains, quinoa, millet, amaranth, teff, buckwheat, wild rice, or not wild rice, and sprout them and put them? Or are you saying B, take chickpeas, lentils, black-eyed peas, lima beans, sprout them and put them in your salad? Or are you saying C, take the little tiny seeds, the clover, radish, onion, garlic? For these 2 big salads that we need to fill us, get protein, really get it, what is the main thing? Which one of those are you saying?
I think all of the above. And the sprouts, as time went on, in the early days I needed lots of beans, lots of grains, lots of heavy things. And as time went on, we gravitated more to the sunflowers, to the pea greens, to the light leafy greens. And I think it's where you are emotionally and physically and energetically. At this point, we lift intensely heavy weights 3 days a week. We exercise aerobically 7 days a week. But the reality is, and we work like horses. But the fact of the matter is, your body becomes familiar with less food at high energy at times. So I could not sustain, when I changed my diet to a raw food diet at the beginning, on what I'm doing today. So I think it's really an evolutionary process, and you've got to be sensitive to that. We watch people every week come in off Western diets and heavy vegan diets and everything else. And they detox. It takes emotional, as we talked earlier, and physical detoxification. But as time passes, the body becomes refined and knows how to absorb the nutrients out of less food at high qualities.
And of course, it's important also to note that there are some legumes you can't eat sprouted. They would not be safe to eat sprouted, and the larger legumes it's the smaller legumes like lentils and mung beans that are really safe to sprout. Even chickpeas are a little bit debatable. Having some, fine, but you wouldn't want huge amounts because the levels of trypsin inhibitors are high enough to compromise amino acid absorption to a reasonable extent. So depending on how much protein you're eating, whether or not that would be an issue. But a lot of the larger legumes are very toxic, eaten, even sprouted. I mean, you're reducing some of the anti-nutrients when you sprout, but you can't eat things like red kidney beans sprouted. They have to be cooked before being eaten.
Well,
just to be clear.
This one I'm not sure about. So let's, one of the great debates I had was years ago. There was a very smart commentator in Baltimore, and around the same time they came out with a study from Hopkins saying that when you cooked a tomato, you got more benefit of the phytochemicals than in fact if you ate it raw. So the man called me up and pitted me against the scientist at Hopkins on the radio for an hour. That was there. And I listened. I didn't say much of anything. I just let them get in deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And they kept saying, well, we found you have actually more of the phytochemicals, and it's more evident when you cook, and there's no question that they're better for you, and they're going to be, which is true, by the way. These phytochemicals help breast cancer, and they help cardiovascular disease. So the man kept urging me. He said, are you going to say anything, Brian? So I finally said, well, I'm so pleased to be on the radio with a scientist that created a new form of science. It's a new form of molecular science. I said, up until now, what I studied and what I've heard and what everyone has told me is basically that when you cook something, you burst the molecule, and that's why it radically shifts. What you're saying, doctor, it's brilliant. What you're saying is when you cook something, you manifest phytochemicals that weren't there to begin with. That somehow these phytochemicals come out of nowhere. They prevent themselves. I said, in my naivety, what I thought is that you open the cells from cooking, and now you can count the beans. You can actually count the phytochemicals. And I think when you germinate anything, it brings it back to a plant. And if you saw my segment on anthropology yesterday, it said that our teeth never ate nuts, seeds, grains, and beans, other than times of what? Droughts. Droughts were the only times that we ate that. And how we know that, the geologists got with the anthropologists and said, by the way, look at the teeth over thousands and thousands of years. They're eating leaves, they're eating fruit, they're eating leaves, they're eating fruit. There was a drought for this 10-year period, a 5-year period. Now they eat nuts, but by the way, in a 2-year period, a 5-year period, their teeth show they ate leafy greens again. So I would always say that if you're going to cook something, you germinate it first. And I would agree with that.
Oh,
You
yeah, I
germi-
think it's
yeah,
great.
yeah. But I'm not sure that we have to worry. And what the so-called poison, we don't want to alarm anyone. The so-called poison is brilliant, by the way, that well before humans showed up, before the planet got screwed up, that we literally had every seed, every nut, every grain, every bean, which are all seeds, by the way, have an enzyme inhibitor on it that's a pesticide. So that particular form of seed would never, ever perish. So the animals would never eat all of them. They'd get sick and stop eating it. Isn't that unbelievable how nature does this? It's a symbiosis, a brilliance of nature, a spiritual process that goes on. And by the way, the bugs would never eat it. And that enzyme inhibitor is now what we're calling fancy words that you can't digest, and it may be, I wouldn't call them a poison, but they're not as pro-nutritious. But when you germinate it, that disbands, it goes away. And then, again, if you have these incredibly high fiber things like a kidney bean, and I agree with you on chickpeas, by the way. You can eat raw chickpeas, but boy, they're hard to eat. At the beginning, I needed to do that because I wanted something instead of the soy burger. I wanted raw something, but the reality is, I don't favor those things now, but maybe some people need it, and I don't want to alarm you that sprouted and raw, if you're fighting cancer, sprouted and raw chickpeas are going to give you poison. They're not going to give you poison. They may be a little harder. You sprout them enough, they're not going to be hard to digest. Comparative if you didn't sprout them. Think about a dried chickpea. How many of you would take it and try to chew it and swallow it? Well, think about that. I wouldn't do it. Would you do it? If you soaked it, easier, still hard. If you sprout it, you could chew it and swallow it. And so just think about it in logical terminologies.
Our chefs at the Institute makes amazing raw hummus from chickpeas, sprouted chickpeas. But of course, there are some sprouts that are much easier for you to digest. So if you're starting and you don't have a good digestion or your teeth are not functioning as well, then start with the broccoli, the alfalfa, cabbage, radish.
Light leafy greens.
Yeah, the light leafy greens like sunflower, because they're grown for 7 days at least, and they are so much easier to digest.
Mung
for
bean
you.
sprouts.
Mung beans, sprouts, they're grown maybe for 4 or 5 days. Zucchini beans for 5 days. And so if you sprout something just for 24 hours, that is not so easy to digest. And that's usually the beans. And even we serve some of the beans at the Institute, and some people don't digest them well. So I say skip them for now. But like Brian said, eventually you actually get used to them.
And then you
We're
don't
all-
want them anymore.
Yeah, and then you don't
You get
want
used to them, you don't want them.
yeah. So the longer something has grown to sprout, 4 or 5 days, 7 days, the easier to digest it is.
And the more the anti-nutrients come down. But just to be clear, it's not so much the digestibility of course, the chickpea once it's sprouted, it's that it contains something called trypsin inhibitors, which inhibit the ability of trypsin, which breaks down amino acids from foods so that we can digest those amino acids and use them. And so if you're consuming a lot of trypsin inhibitors, you're less able to digest and absorb the proteins, the amino acids that you need. So there's a sort of a limit of how many of those you would want to include in your diet because of that. Whereas with peas and mung beans and lentils, they have much lower levels of those compounds.
And by the way, pea sprouts are amazingly high in protein. Mung bean sprouts are amazingly high in protein. This is why Asian food, no matter where you are in Asia, thousands and thousands, they all had mung bean sprouts in their food.
But Brian, are you saying that you're in agreement to some degree with what Brenda's saying, that chickpeas, lima beans, big beans, if they're soaked and sprouted for 3 days, are still, because I haven't in the past heard you make a warning on certain beans.
No.
Brenda has some concerns of some of the larger beans. You're not concerned about them, or you are?
These enzyme inhibitors have never really been studied after germination at any significant level. You know, there's studies done on the beans themselves, but there's no long-term studies on sprouted beans. And that's, again, a whole nother area that we have to look into.
Well, when it comes to some of the larger beans like kidney beans, we're more concerned about the hemagglutinins or the lectins than the trypsin inhibitors even. And in those cases, if you eat fairly raw kidney beans, have you ever eaten raw kidney beans?
No, I'm not
I mean,
interested in that.
they will make you violently ill. So that's, there's some hemagglutinins that are really toxic.
Yeah, but you've got to think about this in a practical way too. And I don't know what you have to, but I'm thinking about it. If I took a kidney bean dried, or if I took a chickpea, which is a bean, by the way, we call it a pea, but it's a bean, or a red bean, or a navy bean, or a pinto bean, or a black-eyed pea, all of these things. And I would never just take them, chew them, and eat them. So your body, you don't even have to know the science on it. Your body says, hey, you don't want that. You soak it. I really don't want that. It's still going to crack my teeth. I germinate it. It becomes increasingly easier to eat the longer you germinate it. But I have never seen a body of evidence. I hope there is a body of evidence
There
at some
is,
point.
actually. In Becoming Raw, we went through the literature and looked at exact percentages of reductions over time in, for example, in soybeans and in all of these beans, whatever science has been done, and what percentage of reduction you get with hemagglutinins. And of course, the longer you sprout, the greater the reductions.
Yeah.
But still, the general consensus is that the larger beans are probably not a good idea to be eating raw. But sprouting before cooking is a really good idea, because you're decreasing anti-nutrients, and you're releasing nutrients and making them much more valuable foods.
You alluded to it, but that's what I found. Almost every bit of information was done on soya. I mean, that seems to be like they get stuck on soy. Why? Because it's such a cash crop worldwide. But, kidney, I think I've read one thing on kidney, but I haven't seen on black-eyed peas, even chickpeas. I haven't seen real studies that show you
I can
Are
show
there?
you.
Good,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. So, as tempting as it is to move on, I just want to clarify. I mean, in your past 20 years, is large beans part of the program?
Yes.
Is this a non-point, or is it something that actually you do recommend and still recommend? In other
Well-
words, Brenda's saying that she's got research that concerns her. I eat raw chickpeas. Are you recommending, again, just let's clarify even further,
Well-
to what degree are you concerned about large beans?
We're not concerned from our observation, in my case, of using it for 48 years with people. I'm not concerned, because I don't see it. It's not a main part of the diet. That's it. So this is why I'm open. If there's and research, by the way, is just why I told the story about Johns Hopkins. There's somehow a disconnect between chemical science and what's really happening inside the cellular structure and anatomy of the body, and a lot of this is speculation at best. It's really not. We may see what's in the bean, we may see what's in the food, we may see the toxic level, but have we really taken it to the point where we've done human studies over long periods of time? That I've never seen, because nobody's interested in that. I mean, other than me or you, nobody's interested in that. So the studies are pretty much in there. I would like to see that. I don't see people having a problem with it. What I use these things, and not lots of them because I don't like them myself much, is when people are getting off heavy food, you need to give them something heavy that's not going to hurt them. Now, frankly, if you're not fighting a major disease, eating a cooked bean that's sprouted, big deal. Big deal, as long as it's not your main diet. But, by the way, when I have a person who's fighting stage 4 cancer or HIV, which we do all the time, this is half of the people that we have coming to us, some major catastrophic disease, I can't say to them, by the way, you're only going to eat light leafy green sprouts and you're going to be happy. They're not emotionally ready for that. So a sprouted chickpea hummus that we sprout well and everything, I haven't seen a problem with that. Maybe it's not the perfect food, but I'm not going to tell these people to eat cooked food. Because one thing we have learned, without any question, and I used to make mistakes because I wanted people to like me when I was young, that if you are fighting a catastrophic disease, it's mandated, in our view, that you must be 100% raw. And usually for a couple of years to do that. When I try to be nice when I was young and say, oh, you can eat a little cooked food, I won't tell you what happened, but the outcome wasn't great in many cases. And we don't know who that is. There may be 50% of the people that could eat a little cooked food and get away with it and still heal, and 50% not, but we aren't going to take that chance. Our model for 62 years with tens of thousands of people that we've seen get well is get religion when you're sick. You don't need religion if you're not sick. You can mess around a little bit and have some fun, but the fact of the matter is, I consider these type of things we're talking about recreational foods more than we do therapeutic foods. Once you cook anything, it's really a recreational food, although I eat some of that. That's it.